And this is one of these things where I saw it. And I was like, he's played this year, so he's on pace for 34, which would be a high with the Montreal Canadiens. It's just the past 11 games where he's scored 11. But might I remind you that Christian Dvorak is a guy who has been tainted with injuries after injuries, and this is the first full season, you can say, not on wood, of course, that Dvorak is playing with the Montreal Canadiens. He hasn't missed a game yet. And I said yet, that's it. Game 78, so never really the full 82. This season, he's on pace to doing that. This is one of these things that I think we forget about Christian Dvorak, is the fact that he was a decent point producer when he was a younger prospect. I say decent, not like you went only showing points in 2015-16 or anything, with 121 points in 59 games. Although you could say that he needed the entirety of it because he was playing with Matthew Tucker and Marner on his line. He also wasn't first in the league that year. Kevin LeBanc was the number one point scorer, just a ton more points for very close. But Christian Dvorak, there was a part in his career where he was seen as a guy that had NHL top 6 projectable offensive upside. A guy who could maybe put people in another player if he played wrong. It's why the Argentine always gave the role of the way he was productive earlier on in his career, multiple 30-plus point seasons to open up his NHL stint with Arizona. But eventually, when the Montreal Canadiens lost out on this very continuity due to the offer sheet, they ended up using some of the assets they got in that continuity compensation to get Christian Dvorak, when he was supposed to be the interim second-line replacement center. So you know he was also leaving, so there was an open spot in the lineup for him. And Dvorak got 33 points, 56 games in his first season in Montreal. And as I said, he's on pace to break that this season, but the fact that he's gone through so many years with injuries and not really being able to just get his groove in him, now that he's getting a full season, and now the last few months of the year have been so important, now we're starting to see Christian Dvorak play some of the best hockey he's ever had. And that's great. This is what it feels like to see a guy who's really fitting in with this environment. You're seeing Brendan Gallagher go out there and do smart. Doc Anderson's looking good. And Dvorak is one of two guys that I think is worth mentioning in this video commentary. The other is how much new about it. Here's an article that was posted on RDS.ca by Billy Bertrand. This tweet pretty much summarizes everything you need to see. Since being playing center March 11th, Alex Wheeler leads the entire NHL in scoring opportunities off his own zone entries. He's playing similar hockey, and his confidence is up. He will be a solid third-line center next year. Now, Alex Wheeler is a guy who doesn't necessarily have that same point production in a short period, like Christian Dvorak does, over 11 points in 11 games. Newhook only has the one goal against Philadelphia a few nights ago, and then another assist against Colorado. But ultimately, Alex Newhook has been playing some impressive hockey too. Not necessarily because he's getting points, but because he is creating opportunities. And this is a guy who I think a lot of us in the prospect community saw as more of a speedy, play-driving center who could enter. But he's a guy who you would watch into a rush and be like, hey, that's a similar play to what Jack Hughes would do. Take the puck in his own zone, rush it through the neutral zone, get by a guy, and break in, and try to get a shot on goal. Alex Newhook, since simplifying his game in the National Hockey League the past few weeks, has started to generate more confidence. And while he don't go in all the time, and that's a very good point that we should break up here. Yeah, he's getting the chances, but they're just not going in. The fact is he's creating, and that danger, that level of intensity is going to influence the rest of the team in terms of how they attack and how they want to see results manifest for this squad. And that, I think, is super valuable. You're going to be sort of points. Is still making things happen, and that's ultimately what you want to see. Before that, is making things happen. You're seeing Gallagher make things happen. The Habs are playing some really good team hockey, and it's being carried with bursts of energy, like what these other depth guys are providing. And then you have Macho, Suzuki, Sakahashi, and then Hudson cleaning up the garbage and just putting them up in the back of the net when the games are really tight. And you have half of the team that's been able to go down these things and force themselves in the 2025 Stanley Cup playoffs. So then, you can look at it in the US and just keep on getting better for the Montreal Canadiens. Do you agree or disagree? What are your thoughts on Christian Dvorak and Alex Lee? It's never a good place.
Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Nate. And throughout the years on this channel, we've done videos on nearly every place explored in the sky. From the bubbling streets of London to the active shores of Silicon, there's the corners of the Elder Scrolls 5 we get to know. However, one place we've thus far and appropriately neglected is the Soul. Not far down the building down, the Soul Cairn is one of the many dimensions of oblivion we must venture to. It's where the souls of those that forced enough to become soul trapped, or the dead despairing all of eternity. As you might imagine, it's a very cool place. The reason, even amongst the Elder Scrolls and planes of oblivion, as rather than have been created and ruled by a sacred god, as most oblivion pockets are, its founders and first rulers are human beings. Legend has it, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, a group of incredibly talented necromancers, already been experimenting with soul-driving magic, were able to somehow send various chaotic energies to their witness, and manifest their own very oblivious dimension. Soon they ascended to it, abandoned their mortal limitations, and continued their ever-present soul journey. Today, they call themselves the ideal masters, and these godly necromancers take on the form of giant soul beasts, routinely making devious heals with humans and elves, whom they usually betray. Suffice to say, the Soul Cairn and their creators are some of the most incredible, fascinating, and spooky concepts to get to explore in Elder Scrolls lore. And by examining the right books, out of these choices, and increasing those together, we can discover that there's even more going on here than what was directly told. Someday we'll be taking a look and find things you probably didn't know about the Soul Cairn of Elder Scrolls 5 Sky. Starting off, let's talk a bit about gameplay itself. One of the many interesting points about the Soul Cairn is that when we enter during the events of the Dawn Guard DLC, we can't bring any of our followers, say the Savant. The reason for this is that evidently the Soul Cairn is protected by some magical energy that prevents mortals with intact souls from ever entering. In fact, the only way we ourselves are able to enter is if we A, transition into a vampire, and of course, lose our mortal souls, or B, put part of our souls in a soul gem and keep that gem in Cameron Gaffney. The one was able to come with us because he is, obviously, a Volkahar vampire, and doesn't have a soul himself. This is all made very clear to the player before we enter it. However, something the game doesn't tell you is that while it's true we can take most of our followers to the Soul Cairn, we can't technically bring someone who isn't Serrano. You see, if before entering, the player raises a fallen corpse and turns them into a thrall or zombie using the proper conjuration spell, you can then take that thrall with you into the Soul Cairn too. This is because thralls don't have active souls. Now, admittedly, this isn't the most practical thing to do, because most conjuration thrall spells are limited by time, meaning you can only keep one alive for, say, a minute, maybe 2 or 3, before they disintegrate again. Nonetheless, it's really neat that Bethesda paid so much attention to this no mortals with souls in the Soul Cairn rule that they thought about souls and were sure to let them in too. You would have thought Bethesda would have just banned any character that wasn't doing Salon. But no, they made this exception. It's little details like this that really make me fall in love with Skyrim. this you can generalize. Anyway, moving on. Next on our list, it's time to look at things in more of a grand scheme. While Skyrim's Dawn Ghost DLC certainly offered us a recent chance to explore the soul canon, it wasn't our first. Battlefire's plotline revolved around a potential state-driven invasion of the world, and Marine Jacob, evil god of destruction, planned to invade and conquer Tamriel. But before he could do that, he would have needed to have his armies take over a number of smaller dimensions of realms between him and Earth, or Nerd. In Battlefire, your job was to stop Dagon as he was invading those other worlds before he got to your own. Well, you ultimately succeeded. The reason the game was called Battlefire was that one of the first places attacked by the Brits was this sort of space station slash dimension called the Battlefire. It's a really neat concept that I don't have to explain. Anyway, one of the other dimensions he invades is the Soul Barrier, and it's spending a good chunk of the game, like seriously, around 15 to 25% of it, here, trying to get him out. Interestingly, this version of the Soul Sharon doesn't look quite like the big purple desert in Skyrim. Instead, it more or less resembles a giant mansion, populous by various bowmen, rabbits, and other undead bones. Likely much to your use. These Soul-Sharon creatures were actually fighting against Dagon's invasion too, trying to push it back just like the player's Battlefire, though they would still attack the player carrying on sight. As we ventured through our way through this early heaven, which was mostly just one giant dungeon crawl, we would eventually get a chance to meet and interact with the ideal masters themselves. The very rulers of this place. While incredibly arrogant, the ideal masters wanted Reed to a sort of alliance with the hero, as they were too keen on being invaded by a dangerous god themselves, and they would allow us access to a variety of multi-dimensional portals that would help us in our fight. We'll circle back to Battlefire later on in this video, but something I'll leave you with is this hilarious trick by Bethesda. If they decide to communicate with any of the various non-hostile souls in the canon Skyrim, they often say Joey's radiant lines of dialogue, and usually just blinding out their horrible situations, being trapped for eternity and everything. But one of the lines of dialogue they might say to the player is this, referencing that oh-so-early Elder Scrolls game. How dare they cast me from the Battlefire? Oh, they took me to me. Here, forgetting that. That's right. Personal financial story. On the drive, money is the topic. It's great to see you. Join us on this memorable episode of Love, Relationships, and Money. Coming in at number 3, one of the most notable inhabitants of the canon in Skyrim is the ancient undead dragon, Dermot, who we will have to do battle with. He's apparently been trapped here for tens of thousands of years, and will probably stay here for the rest of the years to come. According to him, Dermot was once a totally normal dragon who lived in the skies above Tamriel, likely sometime in North Era, back when Deltas were still flying all over the place. Unlike most of the Shadow dragons who fought with flames and ice magic, he preferred to embrace necromancy, using various spells to resurrect other dragons to do his fighting and form. Dermomir's battles with the Darkness eventually led him to the ideal masters, whom he wanted to look at a deal with. The undead dragon wanted the ideal masters to provide him with an entire army of undead Dovas to do his bidding. The masters agreed under one single condition. They would give Dermomir his army, but first they wanted Dermomir to go to the Soul Cairn and watch a specific person to track here until that person passes away. The dragon thought about it for a while and figured, okay, don't let this individual go with more than 40, 50, maybe 60 years. This is a totally reasonable set of demands in exchange for an army. So, he accepted. Unfortunately for Dermomir, the ideal masters it is pretty strict on him. That person who's supposed to watch over is Boletta, an undead vampire who will never, ever die. Thus, the Nova is going to be here for a very, very long time. I digress. While I find his backstory very fascinating, it's not why I brought him up in this video. Because, you see, he's got a lot of dialogue with the player, and when he speaks to you, he addresses you as a fellow object, a fellow dragon. Reference to your dragonborn ability. This is pretty significant, because you can meet her before you yourself actually are aware that you're duplicate. So once you complete that mission in the main quest line where your dragonborn nature is revealed to you. And believe it or not, you can hold good of your allies, asking why they wanted you as a fellow dragon when, as far as you know, you're mortal. And depending on where you're at in this game's main quest line, your revered response will vary from like 4 or 5 different conversations. This ecosystem, for what you might say, depending on where you're at.
For you, my instinct was to grant you this title. I am uncertain why. Perhaps one day you become years to fulfill. The truth of me, the Dragonborn. You may not be one of us in body, but you have earned the right to bear this title. In my land, the what are